That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Society of the Snow, the fifth film directed by J.A. Bayona, aka Juan Antonio Bayona, which premiered out of competition, closing night film of the 2023 Venice Film Festival. Netflix is releasing it in a limited theatrical window as of December 22nd, 2023, and it will be available to stream on their service January 4th. 2024. It is also Spain's official submission in the category Best International Feature, and as of this recording was nominated for a Golden Globe in the non-English language category.
Do I know this director's other films?
Oh, of course you do. There's a huge Sigourney Weaver connection because he directed A Monster Calls in 2016.
Okay.
But I actually have been a fan of his since his debut, The Orphanage, with Belen Rueda, which I think is a really good, creepy, old-fashioned horror film. He is a protege, I believe, of Guillermo del Toro. The Impossible. This film is probably closely related to how The Impossible felt with Naomi Watts and a young Tom Holland. And he also, unfortunately, got roped into doing one of the Jurassic World films, Fallen Kingdom, which I wasn't a fan of, but can we hold that against him?
Society of the Snow is about the flight of a rugby team crashing on a glacier in the Andes. The few passengers who survive the crash find themselves in one of the world's toughest environments to survive.
So, of course, this was already made into a film in the early 90s as Alive, with a bunch of young white Americans playing these South American men.
What's your pull quote?
A reputable reenactment of an infamous survival saga which captured the world's attention, Bayona strikes a fine balance of nightmare versus hope while addressing the galling and grisly elements with grace.
Mine. Society of the Snow is a gripping tale that takes you through a cascade of emotions. I had a hard time trying to think of how I want to talk about this film. It's very well made. The story, which of course is about the 1972 Andes flight disaster where 45 passengers crash landed in the snowy mountains. It's gripping, like I said, but I feel like with this story, which has been talked about so much, and I recall it when the movie Alive came out. Mm-hmm. The main thing everyone would talk about is the cannibalism.
Yeah, it's like the Donner Party.
So this is a 2.5-hour film that, the plane crash, the scene where the plane crashes is very well done.
Yeah,
And then, of course, at the point where they finally, feel the need to get some sustenance and decide to eat the flesh of the dead. And then, of course, when they're rescued. So I feel like anyone who knows this story and knows those people were out in those mountains for over 2 months, sometimes the film felt a little tedious because we do get timestamps.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, we know day 13, like we know what's coming. So I felt like there were pockets where the energy and the just kind of lowers.
Yeah, it lulls a bit. Mm-hmm.
So
it's exhausting.
That's a good way to put it. It does feel exhausting. Although in the end, I found myself tearing up watching these people
reunite with their family. And I think the emotional payoff is because we have spent so much time, watching these men bond and try to survive.
Yes. And I think as a group, that's where I felt the connection. Like, oh my gosh, this group of people and how difficult it must have been and how courageous they were. But I think we spent a lot of time with one character in particular,
Numa,
played by
Enzo Vogrincic,
who I liked. I thought everyone did a fine job, and I understand many of the people are like first-time actors, so they all do a fine job. But Numa in particular is narrating the film, and he is the last person to die before they're rescued, which of course is tragic. But he's the one character who refused to eat his friend's flesh. And I felt like, he's doing it because he thinks it's wrong. He's also a very religious man. And I don't know that any of that worked for me, but...
Sure, but I think it's to exemplify that this was not a decision that any of them took lightly. But, you have to imagine that how this existential conflict would also visit some of them in conversation. while they're trying to survive.
So the plane crash occurs because the pilot sort of doesn't recognize, they miscalculate where they are. So they think they're close to the city they're landing. So they start to descend, but really they were like much further out. So by the time they realize it, because it is snowy and poor visibility, they see that they're too low to escape a mountain that's coming. So they're trying to lift. But of course they hit the mountain, crash, the plane tears apart. That was shot. I mean, I was sitting, because we watched this at home, and I'm on the couch, like holding on to the couch.
I mean,
it was very well done.
I saw it in Venice. It's intense, yeah.
And then I think, the 10 minutes after, where they're all trying to sort of like wrap their heads around what just happened, and people discovering, who of their friends and family have actually died as a result of the crash. That was all really
and Bayona,
effective.
as we find bodies throughout the film, or as people expire, it's almost like Hunger Games, where you get their name and age on the screen.
Which was very effective. But I think once they settle into what's happening and they start to try to figure out, like, how are we going to get help, that's where the pacing falls off.
Yeah, because they try to find the tail of the plane, because they believe there are batteries in that, and then they can kind of hook up some kind of antenna where they could reach
like radio help.
frequency, and that takes a while and ends up kind of disastrous for some of them.
So about an hour in, they start talking about like, well, we need food to eat, and maybe we should eat the flesh of the dead. Like, we need some protein. And then we see a character urinating, and his urine is brown, basically, meaning that I'm assuming his body is starting to break down its own protein. So that sort of sparks the conversation, and then of course everyone's like, I don't know if we can do this, and Numa in particular is really against it. But I thought I think the film handles the cannibalism in a very tasteful way.
Yeah.
But and it kind of begins with one of the survivors saying, when I die, I want you to use my body for food. And slowly others start raising their hand like, yeah, you can use my body for food. And then all of a sudden, the ones who raise their hands sort of get up and go outside, signaling that they're going to eat this flesh out here because they're not going to die starving. And y'all feel free to eat us when we die. So I thought actually that was a very good scene. And then we see them doing that. The film's not as graphic. No, I think the most graphic part is the plane crash.
I think it's tasteful because, Alive, directed by Frank Marshall, feels a lot more sensationalized to me, and not only because the actors portraying these men aren't of the same nationality of who this happened to, and they're keeping it in the same time and place.
Another peak in the story is because they have a radio that works, so they can hear radio transmission, but the radio to call out, that doesn't work. So they have been listening to the radio, and they hear at a point that the search, like the military search for this plane, has ended. So of course they're super emotional because they feel like all hope is lost. And the news report says that the search won't begin again until the spring, when the ice starts to thaw. And we also hear that there have been 34 crashes in the Andes, and there have never been any survivors found. So that's why they're also sort of stopping the search, because no one believes that anyone could have survived this long. So that's another moment that, brings a lot of feelings. Then we see that 3 of them leave to try to find the tail of the plane, and they end up getting stuck overnight. So the pacing isn't the worst.
It's exhausting having to sit in this situation with them.
Then I think at the 30-day mark, maybe, or before then, they're in their plane where they sleep, and an avalanche hits. So they're buried in snow.
Killing more of them.
Killing more of them, and then we see they're buried for 4 days. So that seems grueling. On day 60, they hear on the radio that the rescue efforts will resume now that snow is starting to thaw. So that's when they get ramped up again.
Well, Numa's death also is shown to be a catalyst, because that's when one of them says, tomorrow we leave.
No, Numa dies on the last day, doesn't he?
No.
He dies on the 60th day?
He dies before the Nando and the other one go on a trek. And that's where he dies before that, yeah.
Okay, so that was the thing that really pushed them. So one of the characters, Roberto, I believe, he specifically is in medical school. So he's the one kind of in charge of taking care of everyone. And then the other guy with the blonde hair and the eyes.
Fernando.
Those two are the ones who decide to go out and basically like walk until they can find help. And they bring enough food for, I think, a week. Because originally there are 3 of them, but then when they realize the trek is going to take longer than a week, they have one go back. So now they have 10 days worth of food. And then at a point, Roberto, the flesh he's eating appears to be rotten, so he gets sick. But I mean, of course, the highlight is when the 2 of them are like at the river and the snow is thawing. One of them sees a lizard on a rock, so that's the sign that like it's truly warmed up. And then the other one sees like a cowboy, and that's when they know they're going to be saved. And that's when the film picks back up again because it feels really hopeful. And then seeing them taken to safety, getting food, and then we see them on helicopters going back to find their friends. All of that was really emotional. I probably got the most emotional and started crying when we see, because the people who are left at the crash site, they hear on the radio that their 2 friends have been found. So they know they're saved. And then they start like dressing up and cleaning up.
Brushing their teeth.
That really got me. And then as soon as we think that scene is done, we see one of them talking to the other, like, what are we going to do with the carcasses of all the people we ate? And that was really disturbing because the site is like, I mean, all you see are rib cages. And so it was pretty disturbing. And then these poor people, when they get back to the city and everyone is like trying to touch them and take pictures of them and interview them. And I just kept thinking it's so amazing how we want to get it, like not recognizing that people need space. Imagine what they've been through and like freshly traumatized. And then you're in their face trying to like say, hey, great job, and rub their backs and give them gifts. It's just all so unbelievable.
Yeah. And then, we get to see them cleaning up and they're emaciated. They look like they've survived wartime,
Yeah. I also got emotional because one of the survivors throughout the film, as people were dying, he started collecting keepsakes. And we see him kind of put them all in one spot. And then when they get rescued, we see that he's kept all those keepsakes from all of the dead and put them in a suitcase. So when he's ready to jump on the helicopter, the pilot's like, you can't bring that suitcase.
There's too much weight.
The plane's too heavy, or the helicopter. And this guy's like, then I'm not going. He literally sits on the suitcase in the snow. Like, well, then I guess I'm not going. And the pilot's like, come on, man. That made me cry too, because you could tell that he was trying to...
I'm not going back without this.
To give things to the families of those who died. And it's all...
I think it looks great. It was shot by Pedro Luque, who did the Don't Breathe films, as well as Antebellum, which I loved. And the score by Michael Giacchino, who won an Oscar for Up, I think is also pretty damn good.
Yeah, as a whole, it's really well done. I think just the nature of this type of storytelling, it's hard because as the audience, or like when you hear stories like this, there are key things you want to know. How did the plane crash? Who's responsible? How long were they out there? What did they eat? How did they get rescued? I mean, those are the things you want to know. So I think whenever the film is not focusing on the things that unfortunately are what we care about in tragedies like this, that's where it kind of, was hard to keep my attention. But
sure.
What would you give Society of the Snow?
3.5. I
thought it was very good. I would give it 3.5 out of 5. Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.